Good morning. I'm Jasjit Singh. It's a pleasure to be here in Korea and at the World Knowledge Forum. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm a professor of strategy and sustainable development at INSEAD. I have been at INSEAD for 15 years. I'm based in the Singapore campus, but I often go to France to teach as well. Just to make sure that it's easier to follow my presentation, I have actually put my slides also on my Twitter account on the previous slide. If you go on S Jasjit, that's S and my first name, you will find all the slides there. Or if you search for my name on Facebook or LinkedIn, I have also put my slides there. So I hope that makes it easier to follow what I'm going to talk about. So the topic of my talk is thinking strategically about impact. How many of you want to have an impact? Only half of you want to have an impact? Most of us want to have an impact. How many of you work in a company or an entrepreneur in a business? Most of you are. How many of you have an MBA already? A few. How many of you want to have an MBA? A few. Okay. I'm going to make it somewhat interactive some of the time because it's very boring, for me to present, and I'm not sure if people are listening or they are just sending WhatsApp to your friends and something like that. So I will test you if you're listening to me or not, right? So first question, how many of you think business is good for society? How many of you think businesses, companies normally are good for society? How many of you think that actually business is not very good for society today? Anybody think like that? So most of you are from companies, so it's good. I'm starting with a very friendly audience because normally when I'm a business school professor and if I'm making a presentation to audience which is not business audience, some of them say, this is a business school professor. He can only teach how to make money. How can he talk about impact? So I'm glad that we are in an audience that's more open to the idea that a business school professor can talk about impact. So this is some of the topics and some of the courses I teach at INSEAD. The titles are titles like strategy and impact, impact investing, sustainability, and I run a 1-week executive program called INSEAD Social Entrepreneurship Program. In fact, we will be running it just in 2 months from now. So if you're interested in the presentation today, you might want to just look it up, and if that's of interest to you, it would be a pleasure to have you at INSEAD in that program. So the conversation that I really want to have today is, in a way, a summary of the core ideas that I cover in some of my teaching around impact at INSEAD. But the broader point is that what we are trying to say is, okay, we can simultaneously have a conversation about running a business, very often a business that's making money, and making a positive difference to the world. At the same time, we really value the other parts of the society, people that are choosing to have impact in other ways. Because you can have an impact as a government leader, you can have an impact as a social entrepreneur, you can have impact as a nonprofit, and I'm also going to be talking about that. So it's a little bit of personal journey. Different people have impact in different ways, and I'm going to argue that both of these are very valuable and complementary, so we have to find a little bit of our own path of having impact, and I'm just sharing some of my thoughts along those lines. So the starting point of the conversation, of course, is business has done a lot of good for the world. A lot of you were very enthusiastic. In recent 10, 20, 30 years, there has been a lot of economic prosperity around the world, economic growth, incomes have gone up. A lot of poor people have come out of extreme poverty. In fact, there are some estimates that close to 1 billion people in the last 20, 25 years have come out of extreme poverty. And a lot of that has happened because of market-led growth, not just people giving, aid to poor people and so on. At the same time, we will be fooling ourselves if we say everything is perfect in our world. And in particular, these are two recent books highlighting what I see as the two big challenges. One is the issue of climate change, climate degradation, environmental degradation, and the second is the issue of inequality, right? So poverty levels have gone down in the world, but inequality has not gone down. What that means is, yes, generally the world is becoming a better place, but a small fraction of the world, which is the really rich people, are the ones that are benefiting the most, and the masses are not quite benefiting at the same level, and that we are seeing obviously in terms of a lot of pressure on business. So even if you didn't care about impact yourself, the reality is, there's a lot of unrest that we see in the world today, which is coming in part from a reaction that business is actually not doing very well in terms of helping society, and especially making sure that when we are helping society, we are thinking of all segments of the society. We are thinking not just of the current generation, but also future generations, so that they have an equally well-functioning planet for them, and so on. So those are some of the topics that come up when we have a conversation about impact. But the story that I want to tell is a more personal one today, saying, well, what about the individual? And what about the individual that works in a company, in an organization? And the reality is, from the outside, a lot of business people are seen as these evil people, these greedy business people that just care about making money. But as we know, on the inside, the world is very different. A lot of us are well-meaning people. We want to make a positive contribution. And a lot of times we feel that we are just caught up in this system where, our job description is very clear, we are following certain targets, and we don't have that much flexibility. We do want to help the environment. We don't want inequality, but how do we contribute? That ends up being a tension that I see more and more business people struggling with, right? Which goes in line with sort of a broader theme, which is a lot of times we feel that even if I want to lead a life, I want to do things that I really value, my job doesn't let me do that because my job description is so narrow. In other words, if I want to lead a values-driven life, very often that has to happen not because of my job, but despite my job, right? So for a lot of people, the conversation goes to a point of saying, if I really wanted to contribute, I just have to get out of a company, right? So some people end up saying, okay, I quit and I go somewhere else. So let me give you a very small case study. Some of you might know this person, but if you do, just forget that for a minute. Let's just say his name is John. So John is a friend of yours, and he is, let's say, one of the top business leaders at Microsoft, responsible for business development in Asia. And he's doing very well in his business. He's working 9 to 9. He's getting promotions. He's seen as this high flyer, but deep inside, he's feeling something is missing. He's also feeling a little bit burnt out. So he takes a break. He goes to Nepal. He goes trekking to Nepal, and while going in the mountains, he goes to a village and he sees a school. So he goes inside the school, and he sees that in the school, this school looks very different from the school he's used to seeing when he grew up in the US. Of course, there's poverty and so on, but one of the things that really strikes him is there are very few books in the school. So he goes to the headmaster and he says, where are all the books? So the headmaster takes him to this room in the school, that's his library, but there are just empty shelves there. And he says, we don't have any budget, we don't have any money, right? So what he does is, he says, I'm going to bring books to this school. So he does this big book drive where he gets all his friends and family, he posts on WhatsApp, Facebook, and all of that, and he's able to get thousands and thousands of books from his network, and he brings them to Nepal. And so this is one of those pictures. This is his second trip to Nepal, 6 months after, or 1 year after his first trip, where he has this bag full of books that he's just brought to the school. right? He brings the books to the school. He feels very happy about the fact that children look excited. They're flipping the pages of the books, and he feels, he can make so much more difference here than he would when he was back in the office in Beijing. Now, this is not an unusual situation that a lot of people run up with. So his dilemma is, do I just quit my job and take this up full time and do it at a much bigger scale? So I will do what we do at INSEAD. We make the people in the room work. Okay, so this is your case study. What is your first reaction, right? So John Wood takes the flight back to Beijing. You are his friend. You meet him for beer or soju or whatever you like to drink, vodka, tequila, whatever is your favorite drink, or maybe coffee or juice if you don't drink. But he tells you, tomorrow morning, I'm going to give a resignation to my boss because I went to Nepal, this is what happened, I feel this is my thing. How many of you feel that you would be willing to support his decision? He wants to quit. He says, this is my life's calling. I'm going to quit. How many of you will not support his decision for sure? You will try to talk him out of it. Yeah? Okay, so let's do this. Just for 60 seconds, ask the person next to you what they thought and why they thought that. Okay, this is called case study in business schools, right? 60 seconds, ask the person next to you. This has the uncomfortable part where you might even have to introduce yourself to the person next to you, which we usually don't have to do at the Word Knowledge Forum, right? So please ask the person next to you, what would they do and why? 60 seconds? You can do it? Okay, start. It's okay, they won't bite. You can ask them. Or the person behind you if you're sitting alone and so and so. All right, so I think that's 60 seconds, and I saw that a lot of people were still very shy in approaching their neighbor. But does anybody want to just for one or two comments? Does somebody who feels strongly that he needs to quit? Do you want to say why you said that? Just one comment. Anybody? Anybody? Do you support? Who are the people who support it? Yeah. Do you want to say why you're willing to say that?
You live only once, and it's a good thing that you finally found what you really, really like. So I would say go for it, but please be very, very specific and realistic at what you're doing. Still, in your pursuing what you really want. Please make a really a concrete, specific plans. I will probably make that advice, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that. And just one comment on somebody who feels I would ask him stay on. Please, the gentleman in the back there.
I believe that he can make a bigger difference where he is right now, because if he stays on his job and to work as he did before, he can possibly persuade even his company to make a difference like what he did right now. So I'd rather persuade him to stay where he is, but he tried to make a bigger difference by persuading others in his company.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. So this is a good summary on the typical 2 points of view that, I teach this as a case study in my MBA classroom. We spend 1.5 hours actually on this case, which we go into in much more detail. But this is a dilemma that a lot of people relate to. I want to contribute positively to society. On the one hand, you say, okay, I'm done with the corporate world. I'm going to do something that I feel very passionate about. I see the impact firsthand. And as you rightly pointed out, it's still, if you were a friend, you would advise them, okay, how are you really making a positive difference? And by the way, you as a corporate person, why are you well suited to do this? And of course, the other point of view is maybe there's much bigger things you can do within Microsoft. Maybe you can convince Microsoft to start with to have some sort of a corporate social responsibility program and so on. But maybe more than that, going even further, telling Microsoft, hey, don't you want to develop your business in emerging markets, reach out to new segments? Maybe there's opportunity for you to work with the government in Nepal to have this countrywide program where you have literacy combined with software, so in the end you find a way also not to lose money, but actually in the long term to build business. And you certainly see both of these points of view in this argument. And John Wood, of course, was exceptional. He went on to create what is one of the most successful nonprofits in the education space. It's called A Room to Read, and it's a very inspiring story. So, on the one hand, yes, you might have a small fraction of people in the corporate world when they say, we want to contribute to society, we are going to quit the corporate world and we are going to do something outside. But for a lot of us, that might not be a realistic option. It's too risky. We feel we don't have the skills, or we can't take the financial risk. We have a family, and so on. And at the same time, going further, we say maybe because I have been in Microsoft for 10, 15 years, I have a lot of influence inside, I have a lot of networks inside, maybe I can get Microsoft to do something. And if I can move an organization like Microsoft, or if you're working, let's say, for Walmart, or if you're working for Amazon, and you can help improve their supply chain only by this much so that the environmental performance is slightly improved, chances are you will already have achieved a lot more than what the average person will achieve if they quit a company and start working at a nonprofit. So anyway, that's one argument about this dilemma. So what realistically a lot of people end up doing in the corporate world is they say, okay, I'm going to continue in my job, but maybe I can't do so much in my job, I'll do something in the evenings, I'll do something in the weekends, or maybe I will do something in a corporate volunteering program. And so this is an example of a program that I joined to go to Cambodia for a house building tour, right? So what you do is this is a program offered by a nonprofit in Cambodia to private individuals, to corporates, saying, please come, help build houses for poor people, and then you also give some money towards building those houses and materials and so on. Now, on the one hand, you would say it's a good thing to have a private initiative like this or a corporate volunteering program and so on, because you're helping, let's say, really poor people in Cambodia, which is a country that has had really terrible things happen in the past decades, as we know. So there is still a huge need. At the same time, the question you ask is, if you put a person like me, who's an INSEAD professor, he's very good at making PowerPoint slides, but it turns out that skill does not carry over to building houses, right? So if you can see my expression there, I am not doing so well trying to put that nail in the wall, and I would bet you that the day after I left, they brought in some real house building people who had to remove all the bad nails I put so that the children living in that house couldn't get hurt. I don't think the house that I helped build there was a house that was worth living in. Having said that, I think what they were after was for me to feel happy and to give a donation. Maybe, let's say, I gave $1,000 US, and maybe 200 or 300 of those US dollars are spent on buying insurance for me, buying mineral water for me, driving me around in an air-conditioned car, having somebody look over me all the time so that I don't hit the hammer on my hand. But, well, they still get $600, so it works out okay. But it's important to recognize that on the one hand, I might be feeling great doing this, but this cannot be the best way that if the goal was to have impact, I would have impact on the world. But I still think it was a good idea for me to go. I went there, and I went there actually with my younger son. He get to know about Cambodia. It was a good team building occasion for us. These were the only 3 days in the whole year when he was not on his iPhone and all of that, which I value. So there were a lot of other benefits, but I am under no illusion that this is not how I was going to change the world, right? So the first thing we started with is people, completely quitting. The second is people saying, maybe we will do something on the weekends, in the evenings to make ourselves feel good. And yes, you might have some impact, but sometimes it's worth thinking, is it really the best way to have impact? But the third thing, which is what the gentleman was referring to, is to say, well, can I be, and these days the word is an entrepreneur, can I be a person who will be inside a large company, but who's going to push that big tanker a little bit in the direction of having more impact and contributing positively to society. So Gabe Bullock, who recently wrote this book, was a senior manager at Accenture, and he was actually in a very similar situation as John Wood, saying, I'm going to quit my job. But then in the end, he decided he will not, and instead he's going to stay inside Accenture. And what he would do is, Accenture, as you know, which is a consulting company, normally consulting with large corporate clients, Fortune 500 clients, but he said, I'm going to make it possible to bring the skills of Accenture to the development sector, to the large foundations, to governments in emerging markets, to nonprofits and so on. And I'm going to do this not as charity, but I'm going to build a business. The reason is, if I tell Accenture, let's start doing projects that help organizations that are trying to, let's say, help poor people, maybe I can convince my boss to do 5 of those projects in a year. But if I am able to convince my boss that, hey, why don't we build a business, and I am going to, through innovation, come up with a business model that is actually not that bad for Accenture to do it. Maybe instead of doing 5 projects in a year, we can have 100 projects in a year. Because if I'm not losing money, maybe my boss will agree to do this at a much bigger scale. So actually, rather than thinking of this as a CSR project, if I think of this as a very different kind of business opportunity, the impact can be much bigger, right? So what he went on to do was, he came up with this business model. He says, okay, I can go to Gates Foundation, or let's say I can go to the government of Uganda, and I can offer them skills of Accenture consultants. Now, do consultants at Accenture have any skills that somebody like Gates Foundation could use? It turns out yes. You know, if these consultants know how to build an IT system or help come up with an efficient supply chain to distribute Coca-Cola all around Africa, actually the same skills are very useful also to make sure that the vaccines that Gates Foundation is distributing across Africa get to all those rural clinics in time without any damage, and is going to save millions of lives. Now, does Gates Foundation have money? It turns out, yes, they have. They will probably not pay what Coca-Cola pays for a supply chain management project, but you don't need to go to Gates Foundation and say, we will do a project for free, right? So his mindset was, can I go to these clients and say, we are going to charge you, let's say, a third of what we would ask corporate clients. So that's a starting point. At least some money is coming in. But now the challenge is, well, that's not enough. Okay, so what do? He says, I go to the employees. Because I'm not the only one who's burnt out inside Accenture. I'm not the only employee who's trying to make a positive difference. There's lots of people, it turns out, inside Accenture who are there not just to make money. They are there to have a challenging job. They want a career progression. But they are willing to give up some money in return for the right opportunity. So he comes up with this program called Accenture Development Partnerships, where these consultants can join the project. They will not have to join the project pro bono. In fact, many of them would have been ready just like John would maybe now, maybe in 6 months, maybe in 1 year to quit. And if you go to these guys and say, you know what, you don't have to quit. You can be in some of these projects, but you have to promise me you're willing to take 50% salary cut for the next 6 months when you get on this project, because if you don't take the salary cut, we can't make the economics of this project work and the project will not happen. So the end result of that was, actually it turns out that there's lots of people, especially younger crowd, and actually he also was able to attract a much more diverse crowd, much more gender balanced, because women were also very interested, and there was obviously a lot of men interested as well, who joined his waiting list. And what he said was, I'm going to make sure that this is high quality projects. I'm not going to put the losers on these projects. So he wouldn't let anybody on this project unless you have an above average performance rating and you've been with the firm for a few years. That's how you build this as a prestigious program within the company. That's actually very hard to get into, even though you're willing to lose money for that duration. And then what he does is he goes to the Accenture leadership and he says, look, this is a program that is getting a lot of our employees motivated. These employees were burnt out or they were going to quit, but now they're willing to stay with us. And when I go to campus to let's say INSEAD or to Harvard or to Wharton, this is the program that all the people in the room want to talk to me about, because they want to be on that program. And they're going to join Accenture instead of joining McKinsey or Bain and so on, because this is the program that in their eyes makes Accenture different from these other companies. So again, he's not going to the boss and saying, you're doing me a favor, you're going to lose money here. He's saying, I'm going to have a program which might make less money than the other projects, but I'm still going to make sure it breaks even. It doesn't lose money, but it really helps us with talent and retention of talent and attracting talent and so on. And we did some research with him, with Accenture, that shows that that's indeed true. If you analyze HR data from Accenture, and we ran an employee survey and so on. So there's a case. Now, it's not easy, right? And what is the right business model here might be very different from what's the right business model in another sector, another company, and so on. But the general lesson is, if you're sitting in a large company and you try to make a business case for a program that it just makes sense for the company, you will get much more support. And so cumulatively, this program has already done more than 1,000 projects in the last 15 years. If this was a CSR program, he would have done 5 projects, 10 projects, and at some point it would have lost steam and shut down. So the lesson is, if you are able to build impact into the business strategy of the firm, then there's a lot more opportunities that start to open, right? So we've seen 3 ways of having impact. One is to say, we quit the company, we do something outside as a social entrepreneur, as a nonprofit. I could talk about it a lot more than we have here, but that's sort of not a path that most of us would do, so I didn't. The second is doing this mindset of either I'm going to do private volunteering or corporate social responsibility. It's very valuable to connect with the world. It's also very useful to have sort of a DNA of a positive culture inside the company and so on. The reality is these programs don't have the biggest impact, if impact is what you're after. To have impact while staying inside the large company, you really have to embed these programs in the business strategy for it to make business sense, that the company supports you. But then you have to make a business case, and the business case might be that we are getting a good reputation with society. It might be that we are reducing the risk. It might be that the government views us as a preferred vendor because we're a good company. It might be because certain kind of employees are willing to work with us because we're good for the world, and so on. So you'll have to really think broadly, because chances are you will still lose money in the or not make as much money in the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 4 years for that matter, but the story has to be much wider, but it still makes strategic sense. As long as the leadership is willing to think long term, you are able to come up with a creative model, it can work much better. So now I want to go a little bit more to this concept of impact, right? So impact is such a commonly used buzzword that sometimes it loses meaning. So I want to go to this very simple definition of impact. Impact is the world with your involvement minus the world without your involvement, which is how much positive difference did you make to the world with doing whatever project you did. It could be outside the company, it can be inside the company, it can be a CSR project, it can be personal life, but really, impact is about how much better is the world because of you. That is what it comes down to in the end. Now, just to make it a little bit more clear, let me take a real example. So this example comes from the UK. There was a research study somebody did of people, for the first time jumping out of planes with parachutes, not without, but saying, I dare to do this because I'm supporting a cause. I don't know if this is common in Korea. You do something crazy and you say, I'm going to do this crazy stuff, and if you support me, or not, you don't give me money, but you're giving me money to support this charity that I'm doing this for, right? Sometimes people go on long biking trips, sometimes people goes around the world, and in this case, people are jumping out of the planes. Now, that's great. What the study found was 1,500 people in these two specific centers that they collected data from jumped out and raised 120,000 pounds for charity. Okay, so sounds like a reasonable amount. It turns out that jumping out of planes is actually a pretty expensive sport. So there was quite a bit of cost involved, but even after you take that cost away, they were still able to raise 45,000 pounds. You think, fine, it might not be a very large amount, but it's still something good, no, isn't it? It turns out there's an unintended consequence of them jumping out of planes. 20, 30 years ago, jumping out of planes used to be a pretty risky sport. A lot of people would get injured, a lot of people broke their bones. In this case, 163 people broke their bones, and the UK health system paid 610,000 pounds for fixing their bones. So now think about the impact. They raised 45,000 pounds for a specific charity in the UK, but in the process of doing that, they made the government of UK spend 610,000 more pounds, right? So if these numbers are even close to correct, this would be an example of somebody doing something with very good intentions, but actually having negative impact. The world would have been better without them jumping out of planes, because then the government would not have perhaps to spend so much money in trying to fix their bones, right? And this is the challenge, and this brings three critical questions about thinking about impact, right? When thinking about impact, it is not about what are your good intentions, right? Are you doing this for the good? The question is, what are you achieving, right? Not that you meant to do something good, but did you actually do something good? And that's the story about outcomes. How is the outcome being improved? The second is the cost effectiveness of doing that. In this case, it was pretty expensive to jump out of planes, but still, it was cheaper than the amount of money they rose, so that was good. But the real killer in this case was the unintended consequences, right? And this is something, by the way, that, just to connect it to the topic of World Knowledge Forum and all conferences like this around the world. So a big criticism is, what are we achieving by coming to the World Knowledge Forum? What are all of you achieving by being here for 1 hour? That, will this change something for somebody in this room that you will end up doing something different with your life relative to what you have done? Otherwise, yes, we spent 1 hour with 100 people in the room. We all felt good, but did it lead to something good? But the second question then increasingly people are saying is, by the way, I flew in from Singapore. Most of you came from within Korea, so it wouldn't apply as much on this conference. But in a lot of other conferences, like climate conference in New York, if everybody is flying in on planes, right, and imposing a massive carbon footprint, because one of the biggest sources of carbon footprint is flying in planes, and then feeling good but doing nothing about it, if that's the case, then that conference would actually have a negative effect rather than a positive effect on the world, right? So this is sort of thinking a little bit broader in terms of what are the unintended consequences. And you really have to be sure what you're doing is generating so much positive benefit on other dimensions that it more than compensates for the unintended consequences on some other dimensions, right? So just, starting to wrap up the first part of my talk, and then I'll go to the second part. Very often when we are trying to have impact, we are coming from a position of heart, right? We are doing this because we want to feel good about ourselves. We want to see ourselves as good human beings. We want to do something which gives meaning to our life and makes us feel that we are positively connecting to the world, we are not bad for the world, and all of that. And the argument is, yeah, that's a great starting point, but we also have to be a little bit like Mr. Spock. How many know Mr. Spock? Not a very popular character anymore, huh? I guess the generations are changing. Anyway, so he's Mr. Logical in Star Trek, right? Everything is about logic. So, and this is how we are typically when in the workplace. If you're doing anything, every decision is made from data, everything involves cost-benefit analysis. For everything we're using spreadsheets, that's Mr. Spock. And what happens is when we are business people, when we're normally doing business, we are like Mr. Spock. But then when we are trying to do social good, we turn into these soft characters with a heart in the hand, but we stop using our brain for some reason. We think that because we have good intentions, everything that will happen is good. But my point of view is, it's important to balance the head and the heart. It's very important, of course, to start with the position of I actually care. But then you should not switch off your brain simply because now you're thinking about impact. You still need to have the same degree of analysis and rigor that you would, which you do normally when you're having running a business. So just to wrap it up a little bit, there's these three things that you need to simultaneously think about when you're trying to make a positive impact in the world. Irrespective of whether you're doing it inside a company or in a non-profit or as a government person, but really when you're planning your career, there are these things, and there are more complicated versions of this diagram that you'll find on the internet as well. But in my mind, for me, 3 circles already is very complicated. So I try to not keep it more than 3. But the first is to say, is this really a social need? Am I really trying to do something that maybe matters to the world, matters to a community, matters to some people, right? And I'm trying to solve a real problem rather than imagining a problem and then trying to solve it. So to have a contribution, you really need to start with a problem. The second is, what are your strengths? Am I really good at doing it? If I'm better at doing presentations than building houses in Cambodia, I should spend more time doing presentations. But think, how does my presentation contribute to society and not just help companies make money? I'm not against making money, just to be clear, right? And in fact, very often the most creative solutions are the ones that are able to find an alignment between what makes money for a company, at least in the long term, and then what is able to also help the society. So the third dimension is, of course, your own goals. Every person has their own unique life situation, unique constraints, unique passions. And if you don't align those with societal needs and your strengths, it's hard to have high impact. At the same time, saying, this simple story that people say, oh, just follow your passion. I mean, if you follow your passion, but if your passion is completely useless for the world and you have no skill for doing that passion, you really should not be following your passion. You should rethink your passion, and maybe you'll find another passion which actually is relevant for the world and where you have the skills, right? So that's why these 3 circles are important. And so, connecting it back to the discussion about business people, I would say there is actually an overlap. We normally have conversations in which we say, now I'm making money, and now I'm supporting a cause, giving to charity, doing volunteering. We should try a little bit harder to say, are there ways of combining the two? Because maybe that's where the impact that we can have is the most. Okay, everybody with me so far? I'm happy to pause for 1 or 2 questions if there are any at this point, and then I can, because I have about 400 more slides. I don't think you have so much time, but I will show some more. Any questions? I was warned that people at the World Knowledge Forum don't ask too many questions. Because INSEAD questions students ask too many questions, right? So I think something in between is perhaps ideal. Okay, so let me continue since you don't have questions. The first thing that I want to say, I'm going to point out a few trends that I see in this social impact space. A lot of people get very excited. I want to have a career in social impact. I want to make a positive difference in the world, and so on. But if you're really balancing the head and the heart, there are a few trends that are coming into the space. The first is business as a tool, right? More and more people are starting to ask exactly that. When I'm having impact, I don't need to switch off my business box. I'm going to think, can I use my skills as a business person to have more impact? Now, I'll give you an example. So this was a front page, full page newspaper ad in the New York Times a few years ago. And this has started to happen every year since then over Black Friday. Anybody know how many of you know what Black Friday is? So Black Friday is the weekend next to Thanksgiving. In the US, it's the biggest shopping weekend in the year. That's when most of the money gets made for the retailers. The biggest sales happen, people go crazy, credit cards hit their limit and all of that, right? So, and what happened was, there's a company that gets criticized every Black Friday for, doing things, actually saying, we should not be buying things from this company. Because in this case, it's an outdoor jacket. The jacket that this company is selling, it has a high environmental cost. It takes a lot of resources in growing perhaps the crops that go into it, like cotton, in transporting carbon footprint, in water that gets used, and energy that gets used in making this jacket, and so on. So what this full page advertisement says every year is, don't buy this jacket. Does anybody know what company this is? Yeah, so this company is Patagonia, and who places this advertisement? It is indeed themselves. So this is Patagonia, which is the one of the leading outdoor manufacturers, outdoor clothing manufacturers. So if you're, a lightweight sort of, I wear yoga pants to work kind of a person, that's not your target audience. The target audience is the hardcore outdoor people who go hiking, doing sort of these multi-marathons, climbing, and so on. So what they do is they say, we want you to think twice before you buy any jacket. Because actually it turns out even our jacket has a lot of environmental footprint. But the others are worse, right? So if you read the details, what they say is any product, there is no such thing as a green product. If somebody is telling you this is a green product, they're lying. Because there is no such thing as a green product. Every product causes environmental damage, they are just different. Our products cause environmental damage. If you don't need this jacket, don't buy it. But if you do need a jacket, you should buy ours. Because don't buy it from any other company because their environmental footprint is much worse. So Patagonia invests an amazing amount of money and time to reduce their environmental footprint, to have cutting-edge practices on the environmental dimension. They do not do what Zara does. They are not about fast fashion. They want you to buy a jacket once and keep it for 10 years. They are not going to follow fashion trends. They are, by the way, pretty expensive. They are expensive because they're really high quality, and their point of view is, when you're buying products, you should buy really high quality products that last 10 years so that you have, 6 pieces of clothing in your wardrobe and that's it. And so you will have a great life, we will have a great business, and we really don't want companies out there that are trying to sell you a new jacket every week because that's the fashion this week. So so that's the positioning of this company, which has been very successful. Of course, part of the reason they've been successful is they've very deliberately not gone public and not sold to investors, which would push them much more towards short-term profits. Their view is actually all of this is consistent with long-term strategy and positioning, given their customer, given their value proposition, given their business model, but it's not good for short-term profits, which is why they don't do it. Now, of course, when we are talking about using business as a tool, this is an example of somebody who has perfectly aligned making money with making a positive impact. There are other organizations. So here's an example of a social enterprise, which is Proximity Designs in Myanmar that we worked with, which has made a very deliberate choice of saying, you know what? Maybe we don't care about making money, right? We are going to set up a social enterprise, because normally we were going to set up a charity. We were going to set up a charity to help the poorest farmers in Myanmar, but instead we are going to build a business. But the business is putting their life ahead of us making money. So we are still going to sell them, in this case, irrigation products, which is what they started with. We are going to use the most cutting-edge design thinking techniques. We work closely with IDEO. We work with Stanford Design School to come up with the right products for these farmers, and we are going to sell them at an extremely low price point. A price point at which these farmers can afford it, but we are still selling, not just giving it away, so that people really value the products they're buying. They have a degree of choice and control over their lives, but we are selling them at price points which might even be below cost. And for that, we are going to now, in addition, show you how much we are improving the lives of these farmers. So a lot of the funding agencies, maybe Gates Foundation, maybe USAID, maybe somebody else, is also willing to support our programs. So the mindset now for social enterprises is not that we are doing it to make money, but we're still running a very professional business. They have about 800 employees. They are not a tiny shop in Myanmar. They've been there for 30 years. But the mindset is, we are running a business. We are not just giving stuff away because it just makes sense. It makes sense to do things at a much larger scale, for us to be much more sustainable, and for our customers to feel much more empowered, right? So it's a different mindset. But again, thinking of business as a tool that in the case of Patagonia was also making money. In the case of Proximity Designs, is not making money, but it's showing you enough impact that you have others willing to support them, and so they can still pay professional salaries to their staff. They're not running the organization with a bunch of volunteers and so on. So that's the first trend. The second trend that I want to talk about, and then I'll pause for questions because I can see we have just 13 minutes left, is investing as a tool, right? So this is sort of the flip side of business as a tool. This is the example of Credit Suisse that we've done some work with. In particular, they have a division called the Impact Investing Division, right? So what this division does is they say we are going to make money. So they are pretty serious investors. This is not a charity division within Credit Suisse, but they're saying we are going to make money by investing in entrepreneurs and organizations which have a lot of positive impact. Right, so this example is actually an investment they did with an organization in China, which works with farmers. And what they said was, we are going to train these farmers who are not very sophisticated in the growing practices. They are not aware of what can make them most money, what are the crops that are most in demand, especially if you look at the big picture globally. We are going to help a large chunk of farmers, hundreds of thousands of farmers, start growing blueberries. It turns out blueberries was not a very common crop that these farmers were growing, but it has huge profit margin. If you connect the high quality blueberry growers with companies that are then processing these blueberries to sell globally, ultimately it's showing up in the blueberry muffins here in Sheila's breakfast buffet, right? And so what this business showed was you can actually make a lot of money while significantly improve the lives of these farmers. But this was an organization that did not have access to finance. They were not that sophisticated in going to the banks, or they didn't know the venture capitalists in the world. But somebody at Credit Suisse sought them out, decided to invest in them. And this would be an example of a company you add to your portfolio with a view that we will make money, but it is also an untapped opportunity for having an impact. Again, just like in the previous example, there is a flip of this, saying, well, you can also do investing with a lens that I'm just doing this to have impact. Right? Investing just makes sense sometimes rather than just giving away money. Even if you're doing it not just not just to make money. Even if you're a philanthropist, and this example is Gates Foundation, which they were working with Bcash, which is a financial inclusion company in Bangladesh. So in the beginning, they had supported them with grants, but then they wanted to change the mindset of Bcash to be more disciplined about running a business, because that's the only way Bcash could grow and become a major organization in Bangladesh to become self-sustaining, ultimately profitable. So Gates Foundation says, we can't just keep on pumping grants into Bcash. We need to get these guys ready to take on mainstream investors ultimately. And the way we will do that is we will start to give them loans that they need to pay back. But what we will do is, the day we give a loan, in this case, this was a $11 million loan, the first day we give the loan, we are already going to take a $5.5 million capital charge. Which is, we know, we are going with the expectation that Bcash cannot pay market rates on the loan. In fact, it might not even be able to give back some of the loan. But it's still better just to impose some discipline on them without getting too aggressive in collecting the loans, to start coaching them in a way on what does it mean to work with an investor. What does it mean to take a loan? Because once they are able to do that, once they are able to develop the business to the next level, they'll be ready to go to the bank saying, look, we worked with Gates Foundation, they gave us an $11 million loan, and maybe we were able to actually pay back all of it or most of it, so we are ready for the next stage. Right? So again, thinking in this case of investing as a tool, so both business and finance, with the examples I've given you, essentially are tools. They're just tools. There's nothing good or bad about business or finance. It's about what do you use them for. In both cases, we saw you can use them for having impact. We saw examples of organizations doing it to have impact at the same time as also making money. And then we saw other examples of organizations that are saying, well, this problem is really hard. We will not be able to make money. But this doesn't mean we can't use a business mindset. A business mindset still can be very valuable rather than always having a charity mindset when you're trying to have an impact. So I will stop here, and I'll welcome any questions in the next 7 minutes or so. Thank you very much for that. Anybody? Question at the back.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. Do you have a view on B corporations?
So, just for people who might not be aware, this certification mechanism called Certified B Corps. Is that what you're referring to? Yeah. So Certified B Corps is a global movement that now involves about 3,000 companies, typically medium-sized companies that have not gone public. There's about 10 of them that are public, which right in the mission make it very clear that some things are just non-negotiable for us, which is we are going to have an impact on a certain dimensions rather than just making money. At the same time, they are also about making money. And the way they do that is they have a certification process that's underwritten by this nonprofit called B Lab, which is based in the US. So it's a my answer is a very healthy direction. They haven't perfected it yet, and there's a couple of things that are very important here. The problem that certified B Corp is trying to solve, and I think it has made good progress in solving, is this assumption that very often we teach in business schools, that companies have to exist only to maximize shareholder value, or companies have to exist only to maximize returns to investors. And normally the minute anybody challenges that assumption, the pushback from the pure finance people, like Friedman is a famous one, is that you're cheating the investors. You promise the investors that you're going to maximize profits, so why are you wasting time thinking about society, right? What certified B Corps, what their solution does, which I think is clever, is saying, well, even if we believe it was cheating to tell that to the investors, it's cheating only because you're changing the rules after you got the investors. And what they're saying is, if a company, right when it's created, makes it very clear, we are going to, of course, care about the shareholders. We don't want to lose money, but we are also going to care about our suppliers, about our workers, about the environment, and so on. And we are going to build it into our mission. If you still want to invest in us, you invest, right? And I think on that basic principle, I think that's completely correct, and that's a great direction. The challenge is, as long as it's making money, it's fine. The problem that starts to happen is, once you're losing money in certain circumstances, the pressure on the company comes up. The pressure comes up because from the outside, it's very hard to tell, is this company losing money because it's really sticking to the principles and doing the right thing for the society, in which case maybe I want to support it? Or is the company losing money because it's either incompetent or it's a fraud, right? And this debate came up, for example, in the case of a company called Etsy. So Etsy had was a certified B Corp, but then it went public, and then it came into the heat, and that thing didn't quite work out. So it's work in progress, because the certification process is still imperfect. They have a certification process, but it still looks like not at a point where you can perfectly nail down what is a good company versus what's an incompetent company. And that is a big challenge, I think, still in this space. Do we have time for one more question? How many minutes left? Okay. Anybody? Any questions? I bombarded you with too many PowerPoint slides. You feel you're done? Last chance? No? All good? Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the morning with you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.